ask you guys, what comes to mind when you think of Chinese propaganda? You would probably think of something like this. Now, raise your hand if you thought about something like this. Okay, now raise your hand if you thought about something else. So it seems like we're all pretty much thinking the same thing. And this is due to our understanding of China being shaped by Western stereotypes. Stereotypes such as that China is staunchly communist, with the color red playing a prominent role. That China is staunchly militaristic, with the multitude of Chinese soldiers. Or, what looks akin to Chinese characters. But that doesn't mean that it's true, or that it corresponds to reality. This image was actually generated by AI. I gave it the prompt, Chinese propaganda poster, and it seems pretty accurate to our perceptions, right? In this day and age, it's not just us that holds these preconceived notions, it's also the stereotypes we are encoding into our technology. Now, what about this poster? We have a prominent blue background, an Arab man, palm trees, oil. If it weren't for the Chinese language, would you guys guess it's Chinese? At least I wouldn't. This poster, made in 1958, almost a decade after the establishment of the People's Republic of China, was made to justify China's foreign policy to their own people. And so for Chinese people, they saw this anywhere you would see billboards today, in bus stops and train stations and coffee shops. And it was meant to show that the anti-imperial struggle that Mao so much talked about was seen around the globe. It extended beyond China's borders and into, in this case, Jordan and Lebanon. Recently, China in the Middle East and Africa has been getting a lot of attention. In Africa, China is seen as debt-trapping African countries through the Belt and Road Initiative, building airports and railways that African countries don't want and can't afford. In the Middle East, China is seen as gaming political instability, such as the Red Sea crisis and the war in Gaza, for their own political gain. But just like how our perceptions of Chinese propaganda so differed from reality, so too is our understanding of Chinese foreign policy in Africa and the Middle East. These posters and I want to challenge our understanding of the world and want us to look beyond the typical headlines and into the historical context that shapes today's global geopolitics. More generally, I want to challenge any narratives that we hold true just because we blindly believe them. Last year, when I was preparing to intern in China, I had to choose my internship, and the options were pretty standard. We have advertising firm, think tank, propaganda museum. We in the West disregard Chinese propaganda entirely as false news, Chinese brainwashing, whatever the communists want to think. And yet, here, I had the opportunity to actually experience and witness and understand firsthand what is Chinese propaganda. I thought to myself, you only live once, and I decided to intern there. The museum, it turns out, is not owned by the overarching Chinese government, the CCP, a cog in the communist machine, but rather by Yang Peiming, a man who started collecting these posters in the 1990s when they were being recycled by Deng Xiaoping, the leader of China at the time. And as we can see, these posters so confuse me. I mean, why are there no people from China here? Why are there people from Africa and the Middle East? And so these posters, we can see, have a lot of visual parallels. We see two men in the same position, confidently defending their land against the imperialists. In the African poster, we see a much more desperate and urgent and violent resistance against the imperialists, such as the fire in the background, the guy with the mouth agape, perhaps engaging in a shrill cry, the hand outstretched, having broken out of chains. Whereas for the poster in the Middle East, we see a guy who's more sternly, confidently defending his land against the imperialists, his arm as if shooing away a fly. These posters also show us that China is not absolved of the same stereotypes that we hold about people and places from Africa and the Middle East. Stereotypes such as the clothing. The African man is literally naked, save for that robe of sorts. And for the other man, we see he's wearing a thobe, a Muslim robe, and a fez, a hat associated with the Ottomans. It's interesting because in the 60s at this time, people in these places were trying to counteract the stereotypes that are enshrined in these posters. For instance, in Africa, this is not what people wore. And in the Middle East, Nasser, the president of Egypt and leader of Arab nationalism at the time, was trying to push back against the stereotype that all Arabs are devoutly Muslim. Another stereotype we see is kind of in the background. In the African poster, we see a background of literal fire. And in that fire, people are up in arms with bayonets and actively fighting. Whereas in the Middle Eastern poster, we see within the desert oasis and the palm trees, a multi-ethnic crowd of people sternly supporting the Arab man. And speaking of Arab man, African man, and men generally, we see masculinity is ingrained in these posters, and kind of we can understand what this masculinity says about revolution. These men, we see they are very fit and healthy men at that, symbolize that China viewed anti-colonial struggles in these places with vitality, as active and alive and strong. And more broadly, with these posters, these parallels and these differences, we see that the African poster takes on a much more urgent tone. And we see that the other poster takes on a more stern and confident tone. This is because by the 1960s, when these posters were being made, many African countries were actively decolonizing. Whereas in the Middle Eastern poster, many Arab countries were already independent. So China viewed these anti-colonial struggles as ones as the colonizers trying to come back. So, you must be thinking. And if you're not thinking, I'll think for you. Don't these posters just mean China has been exploiting Africa and the Middle East for decades? I mean, the 60s, that's what? 60 years of exploitation, right? Actually, no. Posters like these go to show how China viewed Africa and the Middle East at this time, not as places to exploit overseas markets, but as places where global anti-imperialism, independence, and solidarity are alive and well. The absence of Chinese people that so confused me went to show that China does not view itself as a global hegemon wanting to take over the global south, but rather as a supporting role in these countries' anti-colonial movements. Now, in the coming decades, populations in Africa and the Middle East will continue to grow, whereas those in the West and East Asia have been declining for a number of years. This is due to many reasons, such as high fertility rates, lower infant and maternal mortality rates, and other factors. But this also means that the global labor force and global consumer force will shift to these areas. And as the populations are growing, China's influence is growing with it. Understanding this history, we can see that China does not view Africa and the Middle East as simply overseas markets ready for exploitation, but rather as long-standing international allies. When I first stepped foot in the Shanghai Propaganda Poster Museum, I had no idea that my understanding of Chinese propaganda and Chinese foreign policy so differed from the reality. Chinese foreign policy, with these regions being based on solidarity, independence, and resistance to colonialism, has shaped how they created relations with these places in the Cold War and how they continue to shape policy today. More broadly, I urge you guys to challenge the narratives we hold and blindly accept, and instead venture into the uncomfortable and into the unknown. Thank you.